Alright, here's a quick video. This is a timing belt replacement on a 2000 Audi A8. This is the 40 valve engine. And I figured I'd shoot this. I've done this a couple of times now, and I just wanted to let everybody see how much room there is on the A8s. I don't think it's true on the 6s. So you can do this without removing a whole lot. So headlights in, bumpers on, alternators in place. And basically all you do is lock the crank with the plug. It's a crank lock tool. You definitely want to use that. I'll show you that in a second. You also need the cam locking bar, which is here. And there's a real good reason to use those. I've had this car about 2 years. It's never run right. It's just never felt like it's had as much power as my other A8, which has a lot more miles on it, almost 100,000 miles more. And it's just always felt slow off the line. It's never had that kick in the seat like the other car does, and the one before I owned, which was the same one. And I've always been suspect of the timing. I've just never really gotten enough time to take a look and see if that was the case. So sure enough, I lock the crank, and when I try to put the crank or the cam bar on, pop it on one side here, and come around here, and you can see it doesn't line up. So I think it's off about a half a tooth on the belt. I've read where this has happened to a couple of other guys, and the car will run, it won't throw a cell, you won't get any codes. It'll run okay, it'll start fine, it just won't have enough power. And so the car actually had a water pump and thermostat put in before I bought it. So, you know, pretty good chance that they used just marking the belt as the method to pull the thermostat out and replace that. They didn't lock the crank or the cams, and sure enough it's been off. So here's a real life example of why getting the right tools is important. So in terms of removal, it's again it's pretty easy on this car because there's a lot of room. The only things that I do are, one, remove the tensioner pulley for the drive belt. This is called the ribbed belt in the Bentley. The timing belt is called the toothed belt, and I think that's an 8mm hex. Just remove that, pull that out, and once you do that, there's I think it's a 17mm bolt here in the top of the front engine mount. Just pop that out, and then there's three 12mm bolts that hold this mount. This bracket bolts to the front of the engine, and you don't even need to remove it. Just let it drop down and sit near the bottom of the radiator, and then you've got plenty of room. I've got the timing, the cam covers off. All three of the covers are off, so it's ready to go. And that's really all you need to do to get access to everything. Of course, remove the crank pulley. I'll do that in just a few minutes. And then I'll start lock the cams, loosen those, pull the belt off, and then just reverse everything. I'm not going to do the water pump or the thermostat because the pump and thermostat only have about 35,000 miles on them now. There's no leaks. So I'm not going to open up the cooling system. That'll save a little bit of time. And other than that, it's a pretty straightforward job. The only tricky part that I found has been locking the crank, and there's two reasons it's been a pain. One is the location. Shine a light up here. So this is on the driver's side of the engine. You can see the socket. It's just forward, but point down here, there's a control arm for reference. It's up here. It's right above the plug for the engine mount, actually. Your socket will probably hit that. So there's two things that I would say here. One is make sure that that hex socket that you use is seated all the way. This one was a little scary because whoever did it before, or maybe I did it, because the hex plug wasn't seated all the way. It looks to me like this is slightly rounded over, so I got into a little bit of a panic because if that slipped and I stripped this, I have no idea how I'd get it out. There's really just not enough access here, and it was in pretty tight. So this might have been if my theory is correct, then the guys who did this before, when they did the pump and the thermostat, they never actually locked the crank. I'm actually almost sure of that now because that cam bar doesn't fit. So this was probably tight from the factory. The bit I put in there was maybe slightly worn. It slipped a little bit, so I stopped immediately, pulled it back out, got a new one, and then I tapped it in to make sure it was fully seated. And it was on tight, and then I cranked and it snapped loose. But again, if this rounded over, you'd be in trouble. So location is kind of tricky here. The other thing that I found is if you drop this, it can fall into the frame. That happened to me once before, and I couldn't find it, and of course I didn't have another one with me. So when you're ordering parts, it might not be a bad idea to order an extra one of those. They're probably $3 or $4, just to make sure it's new, and also if you drop it, you'll be glad you have it. So that's pretty much it. If there's anything else, as I'm reassembling, putting the new belt on, I'll come back and shoot a little more.